It was around the time when I turned 13 that I'd come to a life-changing realization. During my first day of school, I walked into an English class and it took me about 5 seconds to come to the conclusion that reading is cringe. I could literally start up my PC right now and look at explosions, boobies, and samurais on one monitor while simultaneously playing a video game on the other. So what on earth makes you think I want to read and go out of my way to look at words? But something happened a little over a year ago that ended up changing everything for me. One day I got really bored on a random ass day, on a random ass evening, and came across a little something you might have heard of called Chainsaw Man. And this led me into a deep abyss of some of the craziest shit I've ever seen in my life. Fast forward to now and I literally can't stop. I've done nothing but read so many of these Japanese comic book thingies. I can't stop talking about it and bring it up to my friends who could literally care less, by the way. We'll be playing Elden Ring and every 5 seconds it'll be like, hey, did you guys know that this is a Berserk reference? Guys, you may not know this, but this is a reference to what? Shut the fuck up. You ever talk about anything besides? But how did we get here? What led to this point? Do I still think reading is cringe? Of course. But if you slapped on some drawings, now that's my shit. Why is it that I went from finding all of this cringe to it now having become an addiction? I grew up watching nothing but anime, but now I honestly don't really care that much. Today what I want to talk about is the reasons as to why I read the manga instead. This is not some kind of leeway into saying one is better than the other. To be honest, I don't really give a shit. You're allowed to enjoy anime, manga, light novels, carved hieroglyphics, or shit-stained paintings in your high school bathroom. Whatever form of media you like to consume, that's entirely up to you. All I want to do is have a chat with y'all. A nice little session of sitting down with the boys around the campfire and explain to you what got me to love manga. And all I'd like to do is maybe convince one or two of you to give it a shot. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I have the attention span of something that doesn't have a big okay, how do I put this? I get bored really easily. Don't get me wrong. I like checking out new shows or series that are coming out, but these past few years, it's really become a struggle. I can understand why a certain series is supposed to be good, but a lot of the time, it just wasn't really doing it for me, and I was struggling to find something that would light a spark in me. Then came the idea of trying out some mangas. For me, checking out different mangas felt more laid back. It was pretty quick and easy to pick up a story and see what it's about. There was a lot more variety, and it took me way less time to decide if I liked something or not. This means that there's a lot more room to be risky with what's out there compared to something that would probably be more TV friendly. If I really like something, I could probably speed through 100 chapters in a day like it's nothing. If I watch an anime, finishing a whole season is gonna take a while. For example, one day I want to go check out Komi-san, and don't get me wrong, it's a really good show. But about every episode, there would be like a 5-minute portion that goes like, Komi-san, today you decided to get me a water bottle, and I found that to be kind. The reason why you decided to buy me that water bottle was because, Jesus Christ, man. I need you to understand that I have an IQ of about 4, maybe 5 on a good day. So when a character starts writing out a dissertation that no one asked for, my inner goopy goblin brain just wants to skip it. There's even a lot of anti-tubers that have admitted to watching seasonal shows at 2 times speed so they can just get to the point and make a video about it. When I check out a new manga, I can usually quickly check out like 5 chapters and be like, it was cool. And then there's other times where I read something like Solo Leveling and just become one with my couch and morph my body there for a whole week. The variety also helps because there's not as much censorship going on when you're reading a manga. I've got a pretty strong stomach for messed up shit, but I've read some stories lately that even I thought were a bit grotesque. Like, bro, my first manga was Chainsaw Man. This woman literally vomits into Denji's mouth. As someone who's grown up watching a ton of anime, we've all pretty much turned out to be masochists. We've all become numb to the idea of your favorite show getting canceled. You could honestly kick me directly on my nutsack and the pain wouldn't even come close to how I felt when One Punch Man stopped airing. If you're anything like me, then you have a constant internal feeling of watching something and needing to know what happens next. And cliffhangers are absolute nightmares for me because I always want to know the total and complete story of something that I really enjoy. And when I grew up watching a lot of anime, I could list dozens of times that I really liked something only to find out that I'll probably never get to see the ending. What happened after the last episode of Hunter x Hunter or Claymore? Are they ever going to air Haikyuu again after its latest season? It was pretty much destined for me to end up reading the manga because I just needed to know, man. Listen, I need you to come a little bit closer because this one for me was really personal. I was one of those people that got really upset when they stopped airing One Punch Man. You had probably one of the sickest adaptations put into a first season and then a mediocre one for the second, but the second season was so mediocre that shit's probably never coming back, and it's like, come on, man. man. So for the longest time, I had this itch to find out where the story was gonna go afterwards, and reading the manga was the equivalent to trying to scratch that itch on my back, only to be provided with a $875 sterling silver and ebony back scratcher, handmade by the queen herself. One of the reasons why it's so insane that a series like Attack on Titan is finally getting an ending, even though it's called the final season and the final season part 2, but it's still not done because there's probably a movie coming out and that'll probably be called the final ending arc part 1 of 6. That means it's been 10 years of giving plenty of reasons to drop the series, yet it never happened. So for me, one of the reasons that I really got into manga was because I finally had a way to complete all these series that I grew really fond of. So there were many shows that I watched and grew out of, only to revisit them later on and find out what actually happens afterwards. Also, I don't really know why this back scratcher is $875. Not only was I getting sick and tired of being blueballed, there were also a lot of things that I was missing out on. I'd hear over and over again about these amazing stories that were probably never gonna get an adaptation, and at the time, that didn't really make much sense to me. If a certain manga or story was really that good, why wouldn't you want to turn it into a series or a movie? This is something that gets discussed about all the time, and you could technically say at some point they might do it? Copium? But I shouldn't have let that hold myself back from exposing myself to any of these incredible stories, and after having read them, I wouldn't just say that they're great in terms of the manga industry. I would argue that they consist of some of the greatest pieces of storytelling out of any medium to ever exist. And whether it's a book, a movie, or a video game, I don't think there's anything out there that has made me break down and cry as much as reading Oyasumi Punpun did. I don't think there's anything that's gotten me as excited as reading Chainsaw Man for the first time. Some of these are definitely going to be getting adapted, but some probably never will, and that's okay. If that's the case, then there's a good chance it was probably meant to stay that way. There's just some stories out there that will probably only ever work as a manga, and that was something I really only came to understand after having read a good amount of them. The ambiguity in some of the panels that you read actually help the story a lot. There's a lot of moments that are supposed to be vague and supposed to make you reflect on a certain feeling. To be honest, they've tried over and over again to make an honest adaptation of Berserk, and most of the time people will either recommend you to read the manga instead, or it just turns out like this. Nope, we don't talk about that. If you watch anime for long enough, you are gonna come across a certain type of person that will always say something along the lines of this. And when you see that, I want you to imagine that the person who typed that looks like this. Listen, man, there's going to be times when the actual adaptation outdid the original source material. A good example of this would be the likes of Demon Slayer or Attack on Titan. If you're a fan of one of those two, I'd say you're better off just watching the anime instead, especially because one of these fan bases has ended up becoming a sad cesspool in terms of the ending. But there are also going to be cases where it's the opposite. At points, people have gotten really excited about a new manga that's been getting a lot of hype, only for it to get shitted and farted on and beaten in the middle of an alleyway. And that honestly just comes down to the fact that making a genuinely good and honest adaptation of something you like is really difficult. The production process can be really gruesome sometimes, and a lot of things have to go right for the result to work out. You have a studio, a director, a team of animators, musicians, voice actors, 100 other people working on it. All these things have to go right, and if just one of them messes up, the entire adaptation can get sharded on. Sometimes they'll even just change the story for whatever reason and make a totally different anime. In a manga, it's usually just one person drawing anime waifus onto a tablet or a piece of paper. Obviously, sometimes there's assistants involved and stuff, but what I'm saying is that there's a lot less that could potentially go wrong behind the scenes. You can even compare it to the same process of turning a book into a movie. Movies involve the work of hundreds of people trying to piece together something that some old guy wrote at a Starbucks in San Francisco. 100 people means 100 different ways that things could go wrong. The point that I'm trying to get at here is that it's really hard for an adaptation to turn out right. There's not much reason for it to ever be any good, and even when they are, people will go on Twitter and think they're brave by calling it mid. This one's pretty niche, but one of my favorite aspects of reading manga is that after you've read a good amount, you can start to recognize a certain author's art style right away. You'll know something is drawn by Urasawa just by looking at it, or I could point out a panel that's drawn by Tatsuki Fujimoto pretty quickly if I wanted to. When I read a manga, it feels super personal. It feels like the closest thing I'll ever get to someone's creative headspace. Every artist has their own way of drawing hands, hair, faces, or creating an environment. There's super niche approaches to the world building and character designs, and I'll be constantly thinking to myself, how how do you come up with literally any of this? And that kind of gets lost in the adaptation. And that doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing. The Chainsaw Man trailer looks like it's going to be animated in the same style as Jujutsu Kaisen, but it still looks gorgeous. However, these are two mangakas that have completely different art styles in their actual source material. But again, that's not to say it's a bad thing at all. It's just one makes me feel like it's made by a person while the other feels like it's being produced by a company. Kind of like when I watch a video by Nikki Jakey or Super Eyepatch Wolf. To my understanding, they're still one of the few big creators that completely edit and write their own stuff. So when they finally come out with a video, it feels like this gift-wrapped present that was handmade by them. Hey buddy, I made this for you. For me? It's like receiving either an Xbox controller for your birthday or a letter from your girlfriend. Don't get me wrong, I like them both. But when I read Chainsaw Man, I was like, oh my god, Mr. Fujimoto, I didn't know you felt that way about me when you drew that panel of a woman puking into Denji's mouth. The last reason is because there's currently no other way to check out Dandadan. And god, I love that manga so much. Okay, I'm just joking about that last one. Not really. My last point is that it really just came down to personal preferences. I think manga panels feel a lot more expressive. The types of stories that I can read are a lot more riskier and messed up, which for me, that's the kind of shit I'm into. I like looking at stories that are absurd and over the top, and you don't really get much of that when you're trying to broadcast something on TV to millions of people. It feels niche and personal, and I definitely don't develop a superiority complex knowing that I've read the manga of a popular show or anything. I think the most important point that I'm trying to make with this video is that you should never alienate yourself from certain things. I used to be one of those people that would think to themselves, I'm not really into reading, or I'm just not a very imaginative person. But those things were obviously not true, and I regret feeling that way for such a long time. Whether it's about books, art, movies, or certain hobbies, you should never exclude yourself from certain mediums just because you feel like it or it wouldn't be for you. Give it a shot before you come to those conclusions about yourself, man. But I gotta be completely honest, it's not like it's all good things, which is why I don't really care to say one form of storytelling is better than the other. There's obviously a lot of cons when it comes to trying to get into manga, and if it's not something you're willing to put up with, I totally get that. There's slowly been a shift in trying to get manga to be more accessible in places outside of Japan, with the likes of Viz Media allowing you to read any Shonen Jump series for just $2 a month. And I've been hearing big news that there's other stuff coming out, and that's great. There's so many amazing stories that are under so many people's radar, and I'd love for at least one or two of you to consider checking them out. To be honest, even looking back at what I've just said, it doesn't really feel like I've done much in trying to explain where my passion comes from, and more just me complaining about the anime industry itself. So it would actually mean a lot if you can provide your own input as to what reasons you have for preferring one medium over another. I'm realizing more and more how hard it is for me to put into words as to why I have such an emotional attachment to Chainsaw Man, and I'm hoping one day I'll be a good enough editor and writer to be able to express that. If it's not for my incoherence, I'd love to hear the input of others, and maybe I'll do a second part in listing out even more reasons as to why I read manga instead. If you stuck around for this long, I just wanted to let you know it's very much appreciated. At some random ass point, I decided to stream myself raging at Jump King and vented about how I got doxxed for like 2 weeks. So thanks for that, but everything's back to normal now. I'm currently reading this and thinking about reading this and this afterwards. I also just finished Elden Ring, and I'm convinced that it's probably the greatest game I've ever played in my entire life. And feel free to recommend me literally anything you like in your life. I'll usually respond, and if I don't, that's because I hate you, and I wish nothing but bad things to those things you enjoy. Kidding, thanks.